it's a pleasure to follow the Noble Lady Baroness Walmsley and to thank the Noble Lord Story for securing this very important debate and also for reminding me that I should declare my position as Vice President of the Local Government Association. Seeing this on the order paper took me back to a moment when I think I saw how much vaping is becoming an issue. It was on a local train in the West Midlands, and there was a young woman, maybe 18, who was chatting on her phone to her friend. And the vehemence of the sentence that she stated then, talking about vaping, you just need it so desperately, it's much worse than cigarettes. And that point of addiction, the way in which use of vaping is being experienced by young people, that individual circumstance really drove it home to me. This is a significant health issue. Now, I think it's worth looking at this, that behind this is a semi-success story. The indoor smoking ban, which came in 2007, fairly strong labelling laws, education and provision of cessation, has had a big impact, although, as the Noble Lord Bethel says, we do seem to have hit a brick wall in terms of further progress. But what has happened, as seems to happen so often when we're talking about regulating big business, is that there was an escape clause there, or an escape clause was leave it out, and that escape clause has been vaping. It's become a new method of keeping big tobacco in business. All bar one of the giant tobacco companies have made substantial investments, as outlined by the Tobacco Tactics project at the University of Bath. And I do have to ask the Noble Lady, the Minister, a question here. Is the government concerned about the potential lobbying impacts of big tobacco on the operations of government and the operations of Parliament? And does the government intend to do anything to try and act on that level of influence, which is obviously a threat to future action? Now, I think it's worth looking, perhaps the Noble Lord Winston accurately said there's a huge amount of uncertainty, a huge amount of future research needed. But I was looking at a state-of-the-art review in the British Medical Journal by Andrea Jonas from 2022, titled The Impact of Vaping on Respiratory Health. And there's a sentence in here that really struck me. The public health consequences of widespread vaping remain to be seen. Well, I think if we're going to apply a precautionary principle, an obvious principle, as the Noble Lady Baroness Walmsley said, young people with very underdeveloped lungs still, are taking who knows what substances, certainly the government doesn't know, no one really knows, into their lungs. Basic common sense says this is certainly not going to be a good thing. And it is worth looking at the figures. I'm relying on the British Medical Association extensive briefing that I'm sure most of us have received. 7.6% of 11 to 17-year-olds vaping regularly or occasionally. And that compares to 1.3% 10 years ago. This does really deserve the term an epidemic. And the YouGov survey quoted in the very useful library briefing, 18% of 11 to 17-year-olds have tried vaping. That's nearly 1 million children. This is not a fringe area of concern. And as other noble lords have said, many children are illegally buying these products from shops. This is very clear. And it's also very clear that many products are being sold that do not meet health regulations. And I think it's worth looking at the context in which this is operating. I noted a recent interview with the Chief Executive of the Chartered Trading Standards Institute, pointing out how trading standards is not protected in local government budgets in the way that adult social care and children's services are. And for many local councils, those two elements make up 80% of their budgets. Trading standards is just one of the many essentials that's been squeezed and squeezed and squeezed again. And I think this is a really useful case study for taking on rhetoric that we all too often hear about how terrible red tape is. Well, actually protecting our children from dangerous substances, making sure the law is enforced in shops, that's what some would call red tape. but I would say is something that needs to be properly funded and supported. And I note, again, among the many briefings we've received is one from the Association of Convenience Stores, stressing the cost of fully enforcing vape legislation. Wasn't entirely clear where they were coming from, but I think it's clear it does make the point that if we're going to do anything about this, we can't just pass laws, we also need to fund the enforcement of those laws. And I note that it was in the King's speech in July this year that there would be a reintroduction of a tobacco and vapes bill. So I wonder if the Noble Lady the Minister can give me any indication of whether that will include, or whether it will include a promise to actually make sure that there is enforcement for whatever that bill contains. And I also want to pick up a point made by the Noble Lord Bethell about the need to future-proof that bill. We're already seeing, in expectation of restrictions coming in, of controls coming in, perhaps particularly of single-use vapes, that the companies are adapting. So what we've actually seen is reusable replacements for the disposal of single-use vapes are already on the market, carrying the same brand name, looking very similar in terms of product design, and it's very hard to tell the difference between the single-use and the reusable. This is one of the ways in which people are attempting to intervene before restrictions come in. And I think there's also an area that we need to look at very closely is nicotine pouches. These are usage in the UK is relatively low compared to some other countries, but people tell me from the social media world that it's very much exploding in that area. And we need to look at what kind of restrictions might be placed on those kind of products. How do we actually really not just keep creating an open door to be driven through? Just one final, as the Green, I feel like I have to pick up a point made by the Noble Lord Story rightly in his introduction about the environmental impacts, particularly of single-use vapes, because we are talking about children's health, but of course plastic in the environment is a significant factor for all of our healths, and particularly perhaps children's health. And I will point to a recent study, and if Noble Lords haven't seen it, I'd urge you to look it out. Some study done on a sample of human brains that found they consisted of 0.5% plastic. Microplastics are now everywhere. They're in testes, they're in placentas, they're in breast milk, and they're in brains. And if we think about the world our young people are living in, currently in the UK, 1.3 million of these usually plastic battery-powered devices are discarded every week. 10 tonnes of lithium is thrown into the environment, which would be sufficient to manufacture 1,200 electric car batteries in a year. So this is, as so many issues, this is a public health issue, it's an individual health issue, but it's also an environmental health issue. And we need to look holistically at so many issues from that one health frame.